All right, everybody, welcome into the channel. Black and Gold Breakdown. A lot to talk about Steelers-wise today. A lot of league-wide stuff that's really kind of funneling into Steelers news. So if you're new to the channel, you're not already subscribed, be sure to do that if you want a lot of Steelers content, a lot of NFL content, so many things going on the channel. If you're watching on YouTube, appreciate you for doing that. Or if you're listening to this as a podcast on the Pump Fake podcast feed, appreciate you doing that as well. Today, wide receivers, a lot of them becoming available. We'll start with the releases. We'll start with the trades as well. But I think the best place to begin is with DK Metcalf requesting a trade out of Seattle, and the Seahawks are going to be listening to offers for the two-time Pro Bowl receiver. There was a sense of frustration with Metcalf last year in the offense, where as a new offensive coordinator, Ryan Grubbs, there seemed to be somewhat of a disconnect with him and Geno Smith in terms of their, I don't want to say relationship because I'm not going to pretend to know what's going on behind the scenes, but just the on-field chemistry. Metcalf didn't have as dynamic a year as he's had in years past. He had a career low in touchdown receptions. He failed to reach 1,000 yards receiving for the first time since 2021. It just wasn't the same DK Metcalf we had grown accustomed to seeing. And it makes sense for DK to want out, because if you can go somewhere else and compete rather than be stuck in limbo where the Seahawks currently are, where they're not a horrible team by any means, but they're also not a bad team. They're in that purgatory of being a 7 to 8 win team, going to pick in the mid-teens. That's just kind of where they are right now. And if you're DK Metcalf, that's not where you want to be. I mean, if you're any player on any team, it's not where you want to be. But specifically for a guy like that who could go to a contender and instantly make them better, if you can do that, you're going to want to do that. So DK Metcalf requesting a trade. Now, as Alan Saunders of Steelers Now pointed out on Twitter, should the Steelers pursue DK Metcalf, it would kind of hint that Russell Wilson's going to come back, considering that those two have a great relationship. Obviously, they played together for a few years in Seattle. They still work out together in the offseason. So should Metcalf be acquired by Pittsburgh, it would kind of add to the potential of Russell Wilson coming back, which a lot of people don't necessarily want to see, myself included, just because we already saw what the Russell Wilson experiment looks like. Granted, if you add DK Metcalf to that, that's much different than having, Van Jefferson be the other guy opposite of George Pickens. So it's something that I would be open to, just because it doesn't matter who the Steelers at quarterback this year. They're not going to be Super Bowl contenders. So, would I prefer Justin Fields? Yes. Just because of all the things I've talked about ad nauseum at this point. You're probably tired of hearing me say it. But just because he's younger and you can at least try to figure out if he's the future. We already know that Russell Wilson isn't the long-term future. But if the Steelers are like, all right, we'll bring in DK Metcalf, Russ will be the quarterback again, and then in 2026, we're going to try to add, the future at the position, whether that be trading up in the draft for somebody like a Drew Aller, whoever they would try to get. So I could get on board with the idea of Russ coming back as long as DK Metcalf is also there. Christian Kirk, another name that Steelers fans should really pay attention to as a real possibility. The Steelers were going to trade for him last year. It was pretty well known that the Steelers were going to acquire Christian Kirk ahead of the trade deadline, but then he breaks his collarbone and then is gone for the year. And that takes away the ability to trade for him because he's gone for the year. So losing the opportunity to do that, I would assume the Steelers are looking at the situation with Christian Kirk being released and very much have his name circled to circle back on from all the conversations that took place last year with Jacksonville about potentially acquiring him. And it's a guy who in 2022 had a great year, over 80 catches, over 1,000 yards, 8 touchdowns with the Jaguars as they won the AFC South, went to the playoffs, won a playoff game. Injuries have kind of hampered him over the past few years. We've only played in 12 games in 2023 and then only in 8 last year. So, he's had injury issues over the past couple years, but in terms of a guy that you can add and instantly get a really good slot receiver, I think that that's a move that if you're a Steelers fan, keep an eye on that for Christian Kirk. It can't be the only thing that they do if Kirk is the move. You got to add somebody else on the boundary. Not to say that he can't play on the boundary, because he can, but he's better suited as being, a Cooper Kupp-esque slot guy. So if that's the route they go, I would like to see them also bring in somebody else. So if you can, and look, there's a possibility of this happening too. If they bring in both, like say they trade for DK Metcalf and then sign Kirk or Darius Slayton, who's a name that we should also keep an eye out for as Steelers fans. If they do that, I'd keep an eye on them trading George Pickens. Because at least from the things that I hear, if they were in position to trade George Pickens, they would. And so if you're the Steelers and you get DK Metcalf and you get one of Darius Slayton or Christian Kirk, then you can say, all right, we've got a solid receiving core. We can add another body on the outside via the draft, maybe. And we can move on from George Pickens. Because I don't think they're going to pay him. I think that they are very much, if they get into a position to trade Pickens, they're going to. Not to say he's not talented. We all know he's talented. It's just, again, from things I hear, if they were able to trade Pickens, they would. But they're not in a position to do that at all. So we'll see what comes of that. But if they do add two like really solid names, both via trade or free agency, I think that that's a move that'll be explored. But talked about Darius Slayton real quick, so I'm going to do it again. It's a name that the Steelers are connected to because they are reportedly pretty interested in having him come in. He's high on their list in terms of free agent targets. He's a name that I would keep an eye on. Noah Strackbine talked about it on All Steelers. If the money's right, I mean, you could get him for a 2-year deal that's worth less than $20 million in total because he's coming off kind of a down year. Not to the fault of his own. I mean, he had horrible quarterback play last year with the Giants. It was Daniel Jones, Drew Lock, Tommy DeVito. It was a bad situation. So if he becomes available, then I would, if he's available for the Steelers, which I mean, he's going to be at the start of the new league year, I would fully expect them to be a team that strongly pursues him. As long as another team isn't more interested in them and signs him on day one, I think Pittsburgh will be very in on it. I'm trying to think of another team that would make, a lot of sense for it. Maybe Denver. I think that's, another team that would be heavy in the receiver market. Courtland Sutton is a name that I've talked about on here a lot as a guy who could be potentially moved. He's going into the final year of his deal. They don't seem to have any sort of intentions on paying him. If you're the Steelers, that's a name that we could also see them try to trade for. So a lot of receivers. That's a big thing. And it's a lot of guys via trade more so than free agents in terms of big names. So if you're a guy like DK Metcalf, you're going to have a strong market because the free agent class isn't all that great. Not to say there aren't names. Like Chris Godwin's a good name, but he's coming off an injury. By the way, though, if the Steelers sign Chris Godwin, I'd be pretty okay with that. I talked about it a little bit yesterday. I'm not like super duper concerned about the injury. Obviously a season-ending injury of any sort is, somewhat of a red flag, but Godwin's been one of the best wide receiver twos in the NFL over the last 5 years. And if he were playing just about anywhere else, he could be a wide receiver one. So that's a name that I would at least keep an eye on for them to target. But with this many receivers available, both via trade, free agency, if they don't get at least like one big name, good player, that's a problem. There's just simply too many guys that are available for you to go get. And if you don't get any of them, like that's rough, man. I would fully expect them to get at least one. It would be pretty good if they could get two, which they can do. They've got the money to do it. They can easily free up a lot more cap space with some restructures, a TJ Watt extension, a few more player cuts. Plus, the cap went up a little bit more than everybody was expecting. So, like, they have money. And they're also not paying a quarterback a ton of money. It doesn't matter who they bring in. Fields, Wilson, they're not getting high-end quarterback money. They're going to have money to spend. Not to mention next year, especially if they don't give one of these quarterbacks any sort of like long-term extension, you're going to have more money because you're going to have a quarterback on a rookie deal. Like, you have the money, spend it. If you want to talk all this stuff about, oh man, we're serious about ending this playoff drought, well then put your money where your mouth is and get guys that are worth a piss on offense. So if you have the money, go and try to get a DK Metcalf. Is it going to cost you a draft pick and some change? Yeah, but you know what? Good players cost a lot. You can't bitch and moan about not having good players if you're not willing to pay for good players. So if you can go get DK Metcalf, you go get DK Metcalf. And if you can sign Christian Kirk, you go sign Christian Kirk. And if you decide to keep George Pickens and all of that, then guess what? You got George Pickens, DK Metcalf, and Christian Kirk as your top 3 receivers. It would be hard for any quarterback to mess that up. Like, as long as you have a starting caliber quarterback running the offense there, I think at minimum it'll look passable. But get guys. And that's been, one of my biggest problems with the Steelers is that they live in the past. And they focus too much on the defensive side of the ball and don't pay enough attention to the offensive side of the ball, and that ends up hurting them in the long run. And it did last year. All of us were waiting to see a potential trade for Brandon Ayuk, and we waited all offseason for it, and obviously it never came. And because of that, they didn't have anybody to rely on outside of Pickens in the pass game. So they have to be headstrong and steadfast when it comes to making receiver a priority, because there's going to be a ton of guys out there. A lot of people tuning into the comments right now too, so let me get to y'all real quick. Matt, what's going on, man? Thanks for tuning in. Patriot Watch USA says, I think Jarrett should play quarterback. Hey, I don't know if they want a 5'8", $150 small guy like me out there playing quarterback. Spice Creations, they're not trading George right now. No, obviously not. But like I said, if they were in position to do it, I think they would. If they had any sort of leverage when it comes to, if they had, like I said, if they had a deeper receiver room with another star there, I think that they would explore it for sure. Adonis says this is the offseason for Omar Khan to redeem himself, but then again, we will find a way to collapse because that's Tomlin's thing. Yeah, unfortunately, there is a repetitive pattern of the Steelers just falling apart at the end of the season no matter what, and it is very frustrating. Hopefully that ends this year. Look, I think that this kind of encapsulates how a lot of Steelers fans feel, where, yeah, we're always going to be fans of the team, but we're also not dumb, and we're able to identify patterns. And, when something happens once, it's a tragedy. Twice is a coincidence. 5 out of 7 years, and that's a pattern. And it's something that really needs fixed. If they sign Justin Fields, Georgia will demand a trade. No, he won't. Can promise you that. Fields and George are too close of boys where that would not happen. And like I said, I think that, going back to the DK thing, as Alan Saunders pointed out, if they do trade for DK, that would put a lot of momentum in the idea that Russell Wilson would come back. And, the fact that they haven't signed a quarterback yet, it's raising a lot of red flags, considering that by all accounts, they are going to sign either Fields or Wilson. And it's something where, we've talked about the upside of both guys in terms of talent, where Fields is more the dual threat guy, but Russ gives you more in the passing game than Fields does in terms of the deep ball. Neither of them are top 15 guys. I think that the ceiling for Fields is hovering around like that 16 to 18 range. Russ, like we saw the peak of it, of the Russ experience against Cincinnati. He could have retired after the Bengals game because it wasn't ever going to get better than that. Like the Bengals game where he throws for over 400 yards, 3 touchdowns, and the Steelers put up 44 points. He could have just rode off into the sunset there and be like, all right, cool. I proved what I needed to prove. But by all accounts, it does look like I would bet a lot. It's going to be Fields or Wilson. There's a lot of people within the Giants realm and the Giants circle that think it's going to be Russell Wilson to the Giants. assuming that Fields does go back to Pittsburgh, that's what I would also subscribe to. Now, what that does for like Aaron Rodgers and stuff, that's a whole other conversation. But, I talk about this a lot because, if certain guys are brought in, it would make sense for Russell Wilson to be like, hey, I've got a good relationship with DK Metcalf. Hey, I've got a great relationship with Courtland Sutton. There's already built-in chemistry there. The deep balls will be flying. And like I said, I could be talked into it. I don't dislike Russ as a guy. It's just how the season ended last year. It would just feel like waving the white flag if you bring back Russ to be the starter. But again, I can be talked into it if you bring in DK Metcalf and say, yeah, all right, there's a pre-existing relationship there where the deep passing game could really work. But again, I think that it's very widely reported by just about everybody, every insider, everybody in the Steelers beat, in the Steelers circle. The Steelers prefer Justin Fields. They want Fields to be the quarterback. But now it's coming down to, okay, his agent wants him to hit the open market. Are they going to be able to come to terms on a deal that pays him enough money that him and the agent see it fit so he doesn't have to hit the open market? And if he does hit free agency, are they just going to say, all right, we'll just pay Russ and get this over with rather than have it drag on for a few days? I don't know. But I do know that they prefer Fields. As, again, widely reported by just about everybody in the industry. Justin Fields is the guy that they want. And it's also widely reported that Russell Wilson pissed off a lot of people because of reports coming out about his strained relationship with Arthur Smith. So, Steelers want Fields. Art Rooney is one of the cheapest owners in the NFL. And in large part, I know we crap on Tomlin a lot and by the way, rightfully so. Mike Tomlin deserves the criticism he gets. Art Rooney deserves more, though, because the way that he runs this franchise, it's still 1993, it's baffling. And ever since he took over, this thing's kind of gone downhill. So until Art Rooney II is gone, I don't have a ton of faith that the Steelers will ever get back to winning in the playoffs just because of the way that he runs the team and how cheap he is. That's just my 2 cents. Now, if they go out and they make massive moves at the receiver position and they have another good draft, which, by the way, they usually do, at least in the past since Omar Khan took over. Kevin Colbert had an awful stretch of drafts. But since Omar Khan took over, they've gotten guys that have become starters, become good role players. Unfortunately, there seems to be a trend of guys getting hurt all the time, like Troy Fautanu, Roman Wilson, Calvin Austin, Corey Trice. A lot of their draft picks basically get redshirted because they get hurt. So that's been frustrating for sure. But in terms of the players themselves, Omar's done a good job of drafting. So I have faith in Omar Khan to try to get moves and deals done. He's about the only guy with power in the franchise that I have any sort of faith in anymore. But if you can go get one of these receivers, you absolutely do. If you can trade for DK Metcalf, trade for DK Metcalf. Nobody that you take in the 3rd round is going to be as impactful right now as DK Metcalf is to your offense. So, again, this comes back to my wide overarching belief that people put way too much value into draft capital. It's the Family Guy mystery box, right? When I was like, oh man, a 3rd round pick is a 3rd round pick. Or, DK Metcalf is DK Metcalf, but a 3rd round pick could be anything. It could be DK Metcalf. Then just go get DK Metcalf. So if you get DK, go get him. If you can get Davante Adams, go get him. Go sign Christian Kirk or Darius Slayton. Rebuild this receiver room because you can't have a repeat of what it was last year. By the way, I'm also not convinced Roman Wilson's going to be any good. He can't be your 3rd or 4th receiver. If Roman Wilson's your 5th receiver going into this year, you did a good job. I just don't think Roman Wilson's going to be any good, personally speaking. I could be wrong. I didn't think Calvin Austin was going to have a good year last year, so I can own that. But anything that I saw of Roman Wilson up close and personal last offseason, nothing said, oh, yeah, he'll be good. It was a lot of Beanie Bishop winning a lot of those reps. So just my 2 cents on Roman Wilson. I think that you go and get a couple really good receivers. Get DK Metcalf and Christian Kirk. I think that's the dream. If you get Darius Slayton instead of Kirk, I'm cool with that. I think he's a very solid wide receiver 3. If you trade for Cooper Kupp, I'm cool with that. Put him in the slot and get somebody else on the outside. There's too many big names available that can still play, that can be had for little to nothing, especially on the Cooper Kupp you can get for a day 3 pick. And you have the money to spend. If you trade a day 3 pick for Cooper Kupp and draft Matthew Golden, hey, sign me up for that. I'm on board. And if you want to address defensive tackle and free agency in the second round of the draft, then cool. However you go about it, at least have a plan that makes sense to add weapons on offense, add a piece to the defensive line or 2 on defense, get another corner, get a running back to complement Jaylen Warren. But there's an obvious priority list and an order in which all these go in. You got to be able to get the top 2 in some sort of order. And I think that the top 2 will be receiver and defensive line and corner. I think you could probably defensive line and corner, you're probably tied there because you need another corner opposite of Joey Porter Jr. All right. More comments coming in. Donna says, I don't even know how to fix this team in the draft. I'm hoping Tomlin gets traded because if Tomlin wasn't traded already, they're not going to trade him at the draft. That would make 0 sense. If they were going to do that, they would have done it, agreed to terms to do it, in January. That way they could go find another. You don't trade your head coach in April. That would have been something that was done a while ago. Tomlin's not going anywhere, so I'm kind of past the point of even talking about that as a possibility. I'm not talking about it as a real possibility, just because we all know it's not going to happen. Quentin says, it's like Russ is that dude you don't want at the party because he's bringing beer, pizza, and 10 chicks with him. Like I said, I like Russ as a dude. I don't see the value in bringing him back at all. Adam says, lack of a wide receiver 2 really hurt the offense down the stretch. Yeah, for sure. No doubt about that. And I think a lot of, they traded for Mike Williams and did piss all with him. He had 1 catch. He had the touchdown catch against Washington in his first game. After that, you wouldn't even know that Mike Williams was on the roster. Wasn't good. But there's plenty of guys to be had. Plenty of guys. So if you can go and get them, get a couple of them. Obviously, you're not going to get all of them. That's stupid. But if you can get one of Davante Adams or DK Metcalf, that's something that should be explored. Courtland Sutton, I would throw in there too. I don't think that they would do both DK and Courtland Sutton. So I think that if you can do Courtland Sutton or DK Metcalf, you go and do it. Davante Adams is going to be a free agent. So depending on the money, if you can get 2 of those, that's great. Christian Kirk, Darius Slayton, Cooper Kupp, there are plenty of guys that you can have via trade or free agency. Throw in Chris Godwin as well, where if you can't get 2 of them, you didn't do a good job. Now I'll put an asterisk next to that because if you're planning on drafting one in the first round, then that'll equate to 2 at the end of it. So fine. But if you get a veteran like Davante Adams, I still wouldn't be against drafting Matthew Golden in the first round just to have somebody waiting in the wings. There's a lot of ways that they can go about it. Hopefully they take a smart path to do it. But they can get a lot done as long as they play their cards right. Hopefully they do. And again, if you're not already subscribed to the channel, be sure to do it. Now that it's the off season and we're getting into free agent time, a lot more Black and Gold breakdown shows will take place tomorrow on the Pump Fake, which you can watch on this channel as well. Me, JP Acosta, going to be playing a little bit predictor for NFL free agency frenzy, predicting where certain guys are going to land. Now, trade-wise, free agency-wise as well, it'll be me and JP tomorrow on the Pump Fake. So that'd be a lot of fun. You can listen to that wherever you get your podcasts as well on the Pump Fake podcast feed. So a little bit of a plug there for everybody to subscribe to the channel if you're not already subscribed. Off season there is no off season. So it's going to be a lot of talking from me. And if you like hearing that, A, I appreciate it. B, make sure to subscribe. A lot of stuff to talk about around the league. And like I said, it'll be a lot of Steelers shows, a lot of league-wide shows. Going to try to have a nice, healthy balance of that. Last offseason, we did a lot of it starting at the draft. Now, it's a month before the draft, and we'll have an entire offseason to do it as well. So appreciate everybody who is already subscribed, and if you're not already, be sure to do that. Adam also adds, they will either draft one wide receiver or sign one because Smith runs a lot of 2 wide receiver sets. Well, look, man, the more that the NFL goes, I'll have to go on to SIS to see how often the Steelers go 3 and 4 wide. Like, you're not just going to live in the NFL. You can't just live in 12 personnel with 2 receivers on the field. You can't do it. You're not going to do it. Especially the Steelers who try to run the ball a lot, but aren't good at it. It's not 1994 anymore. Can't just live in the I formation. Got to do something else. So I think they'll add 2. That's the number I'm looking at. I think it'll be 2, whether it be sign one, draft one, trade one, sign one, trade one, draft one, whatever. I think it'll be 2. 2 bigger names. You might sign, a wide receiver 5, kind of like the Quez Watkins or Scotty Miller signing last year. It's okay, technically that's a receiver, but it's not, not going to be a guy who's a difference maker. I think they'll sign 2 legit guys that'll play and get real snaps, real targets. There'll be 2 additions that are notable. Like I said, whatever way they do it, I think it'll be 2. But if you have any other questions, comments, get them in before we get to the half-hour mark, and then we'll get on out of here. This is always a hectic time of year, coming off the combine, going into free agency. And this is the time, a week before free agency, we're going to see a lot of these guys like a DK Metcalf saying, hey, I want traded, start these conversations. By the way, breaking news, the Eagles re-signing linebacker Zach Bond, the All-Pro, 3 years, $51 million. That is a lot of money for an off-ball linebacker. How much is he getting paid per year? Average per year, $17 million. What's Roquan getting? I think Roquan Smith's getting $20 million a year. So, Zach Bond getting the bag. Good for Zach Bond. He had a great year. I wish the Steelers operated like the other Pennsylvania team. I really wish they did. Because they are polar opposites of one another. Howie Roseman is as progressive as a guy as possible. And that's why they've won 2 Super Bowls with 2 different head coaches and 2 different quarterbacks over the last decade, is because as soon as Doug Peterson and that whole operation started going down the drain, Howie Roseman said, all right, you're done. Come on in, Nick Sirianni. And they go to 2 Super Bowls. They win 1. They almost won 2. I wish that the Steelers had a little bit more Philadelphia in them. You trade for A.J. Brown. You pay A.J. Brown. You pay Davante Smith. Carson Wentz starts struggling. You don't waste time. You're just all right, we're going to trade Carson Wentz. We're going to move forward with Jalen Hurts. Everything they do is so anti-Steeler. It's baffling. And it works. So we'll see what the Steelers end up doing. As always, we're going to have high hopes. Whether it be, like I said, whether it be a big name acquisition like a DK Metcalf or Davante Adams, or hell, maybe a Brandon Ayuk. Why not? Let's start that whole thing again. The 49ers are apparently taking calls for him. What a shit show that's turned into, by the way. He signed Brandon Ayuk to a big money deal last year. He gets hurt. Now you're going to try trading him. Oh my goodness. That's a lot of dead money they're going to have to eat. Already traded away Deebo Samuel. That team's going to look a lot different. So maybe Brandon Ayuk could be the guy. I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about that until things become real with that, because I'm not going to spend this offseason like I did last year and just talk about Brandon Ayuk every day. But whoever it ends up being, I think it'll be two. Like I said, trade one, sign one, draft one. In some way, shape, or form, it'll be two guys. So appreciate everybody for tuning in. Be back tomorrow on the Pump Fake. Me, JP Acosta, predicting where a lot of guys are going to end up, whether it's free agents, trades, a lot of stuff. Tomorrow on the Pump Fake. If you're not already subscribed, be sure to do that. See you guys tomorrow. Have a good one. Talk soon.